It's very swampy. You can see how this river kind of meanders in number 4. But anyway, Ogden writes back to Butler, and he says, you know, you made the greatest fiscal folly of the 19th century. And so I've got 73 more years to go, but he knows it's already the big fiscal folly. Butler writes back, said, do me a favor, Bill, sell as much of the land as you can and get whatever price you can get for it. And Ogden does. He sells it, and he sells a third of the entire parcel, a third, and he recovers the $100,000. He says to himself, I'm going to stay here. And he does. He makes a fortune. He develops Ogden Slip. He brings the railroad to Chicago. We were way behind St. Louis and Cincinnati, but they depended on river traffic only. Ogden brought the railroad here, and with the railroad and the river traffic, we became a very important center of commerce and industry, and it was quite important. So Ogden was a very important guy. So if you look at number 4, here's what the river looks like in 1830. It curves dramatically. It goes into the lake. That curve isn't there anymore. It's been dredged and straightened. And one of the early dredgers of the lake was a graduate of West Point. His name was Jefferson Davis, and we all remember him as being the first and only president of the Confederate States of America. Anyway, in 1854, just off to the left, over to your left over there, the Illinois Central Railroad was given permission to build a trestle in the lake, railroad tracks. And between the trestle and Lake Michigan, which was Michigan Avenue, that got all filled in with land. We're going to see a lot of landfill. Let's turn over to number 5.
Number 5.
And what happens? Look at all the boats here. This is 1869. This has become one of the great ports of America. We're in the middle of the country. We're not on an ocean. We're on a river, not a lake. What happened? Well, first of all, in the east, they built the Erie Canal. It connected the Hudson River to the Great Lakes. Then in 1848, after about 12 years of construction, we built the Illinois-Michigan Canal, which connected our river to the Mississippi. So suddenly, you could ship products from Europe to the East Coast, up the Hudson to the Erie Canal, into the Great Lakes, to Chicago, onto the Mississippi, and out to the west. Chicago was the center of trade that moved west. It was really quite incredible. And you see them right at the mouth of the river. It was a really important thing, and we became an incredibly important port. We got a ways to go. So let's point out some buildings while we're doing it. As a matter of fact, historically, if you look to your left, look at all those buildings. In 1960, that was the Illinois Central Railroad yards. Remember I told you they built a trestle in the 1850s. But these were all railroad yards. The railroads own the air rights above their railroad tracks, which they can sell. They did. They brought in the offices of Ludwig Mies van der Rohe, and they created a master plan for there was 80 acres here of railroad tracks. They created a master plan, and suddenly we have a whole new neighborhood. It's called Illinois Center, named after the Illinois Central Railroad, and a subsection of it, the last 20 acres, was a par 3 9-hole golf course until about 12 years ago. A company by the name of Magellan bought that acreage, and they're creating a subsection of Illinois Center called Lakeshore East. And one of the great new buildings coming up here is on your left. Look how the walls sway up and go down, up and down. The building goes up to 1,198 feet. It's the third tallest building in the city, and ladies, you should be very proud. It's the tallest building in the world, designed by a female architect, Chicago's own Jeannie Gang. And she's really done some spectacular job of doing that. As we go along, we're going to find up to our right a few blocks. If we go to number 6, there's a cabin. That was John Baptiste Dusables Cabin. John Baptiste Dusables was the first non-native settler who came to Chicago. He came here in 1780. And interestingly enough, he was part Haitian, part French. So the French have something to do. So July 14th, happy Bastille Day, everybody. Voila, let's set up some fireworks. He came here. He was a fur trapper, as most people were here. The French came, great numbers. Fur trapping was very important. It was the biggest industry in Chicago from 1800 to about 1830. John Astor, the famous Astor family, set up, and he was in charge of the fur trading company here in Chicago during that time. Where are we? I gotta see where we're at. Okay. This is the newest bridge in Chicago. It's 1980. The newest Trunnion Bascule Bridge. Trunnion Bascule bridges were invented here about 1900, and we'll talk more about the bridges just a little later on in the tour. Let me look where we're at a little bit. Anyway, Dusables Cabin was just in front of us on the right side of the river, and coming up as soon as we get past these big buildings, one of these big buildings, we're going to see the Tribune Tower. The Tribune Tower, the Tribune was started in 1847 by Joseph Medill. He came here, became the co-owner and the editor, and he was a very important guy. He basically, he got Abraham Lincoln nominated to run for President of the United States because of the power of his paper. And I'll show you where that nomination took place. Anyway, we'll be coming up on the right side. We'll see the Tribune Tower. The Tribune Tower, the paper was started in 1847, and it was a very important paper. It's still in print today. And in 1920, Colonel Robert McCormick, the then publisher and owner of the paper, said, I want a beautiful building, and there it is on the right, to represent our newspaper. He had an international contest. The first prize was $50,000. 262 architects from 24 countries entered the contest, and it was won by Hood and Howe, New York architects who helped design the Rockefeller Center. The building, the top of the building, you see that Gothic tower. It's modeled after the Butter Tower of the cathedral in Rouen, France. The Tribune sold the building 2 years ago. They moved out about 9 months ago. They don't live there anymore. The building's being converted, how things change, to very expensive condominiums. So, okay, so that's where Dusables Cabin was, and our first newspaper. Let's turn the page over to number 7. We've been going under these bridges here. I said there were Trunnion Bascule bridges. Trunnion is the heavy weight. It's underneath the bridge. You can't quite see it. There's a heavy counterweight. Bascule's a French word that means seesaw. And that's the way they work, like a seesaw. They were invented here in 1900. The old bridges that we had here, remember, saw that picture with all the boats? We were a great big port. And remember, it's a kind of an interesting city, the way we're laid out, a little bit like Manhattan, with Queens, Brooklyn, Manhattan. If you look to the right, that's the north side of the city. The southern tip of the north side of the city stops at the river. If you look to the left side, that's the south side of the city. So the northern tip of the city, the northern tip of the south side of the city stops at the river. And in front of us is the west side of the city. And the east side of the east tip of the west side stops at the river. So you're going to have bridges, otherwise people can't connect with one another, and that's what they did. But the early bridges, because they had to open up, they were called swing bridges. And as you can see here, there's a swing bridge. They would have a column in the middle of the river, and the bridge would swing open, but you had these narrow canals, and there was all sorts of ships running into one another. It was a terrible problem. And finally, about 1900, we invented the Trunnion Bascule Bridge. You don't have anything in the middle of the river. You have a big space, and they open up like this. And they do open up. These bridges do work. Basically, in the fall and the spring, when the sailboats go to the lake, or come from the lake in the fall back to dry dock, and they do open up. Here we're coming to the Clark Street Bridge. There was an interesting thing that happened here at the Clark Street Bridge. It was called the Lager War, the Lager Revolution. Daniel Boone's cousin was the mayor of the city in 1852. This Clark Street Bridge is where that's State Street. Forgive me, I spoke too quickly. Anyway, the Lager Street Wars. Daniel Boone's cousin was the mayor of the city. He was a member of the Know Nothing Party. Didn't like immigrants too much, and he had set up a big police force, and they enforced a law that never had been enforced before. The law was that taverns couldn't be open on Sundays. Now, one of the big immigrant populations were Germans and Irish, and they liked their beer. And Sunday was their day off because people worked very hard in those days. All of a sudden, they were very angry about the whole notion of the taverns being closed on Sunday. They started a revolution. They marched. The bridge in front of us is the Clark Street Bridge. Now I'm on time. They came. Boone had his police force on the other side. It was a swing bridge. They swung it open so they couldn't get across. And voila, all of a sudden, the poor Irish and Germans, they couldn't continue their little revolution. So what did they do? They went and voted in the next election. And all of a sudden, that started ethnic politics in the city of Chicago. Mr. Boone was not reelected. Their friends were reelected who opened the taverns on Sunday. So a little bit of how those things work. Let's look, how far are we away? Let's look, Merchandise Mart. It's coming up. It's coming up. The bridge houses, by the way, are not manned on a regular basis. You see bridge houses all along. They used to be. There used to be a man in the bridge houses all the time. But it became too expensive. Now when they open and close the bridges, they have a team from the Department of Sanitation of all places. They drive a truck to a bridge house. They open the bridge. The sailboats go under. They close the bridge. They get back in their truck and they go to the next bridge. I had a neighbor who owned a sailboat. He said, come on out with us one day. We'll take you from dry dock out to the lake. It took about 7 hours. It was the most boring experience I've ever had in my life. It went on and on and on and on and on. Okay, on the right, coming up, you'll see a great big gray limestone building, and look at number 8. That was the Merchandise Mart. It was built in 1929-1930 for the Marshall Field Company. Marshall Field came to Chicago from Pittsfield, Massachusetts. And he came here just about at a time when something new was invented. It was called the department store. We had it in New York with Macy's, Philadelphia with John Wanamaker, and here in Chicago with Marshall Field. He died in 1906, and he died as the richest man in Chicago, leaving an estate of $100 million. Now, he died in 1906, but his estate was managed by a trust, and the trust had to make money. So they invested in real estate. One of their investments was the building of the Merchandise Mart. The Merchandise Mart, when it was built in 1930, at the beginning of the Great Depression, was the largest, not the tallest, the largest building in the world. 4.5 million square feet under one roof, and the building is a beautiful Art Deco building. Art Deco was a popular style in the 20s and 30s. Art Deco is important for using expensive materials, limestone, beautiful ornamentation. Look at the diamond with the gold leaves all over the ornamentation, and the sense of verticality. The architects created an optical illusion. Under the windows, you see those dark horizontals. Under the windows, they're indented. The verticals, called piers, go up uninterrupted, and your eyes go up, 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 up. So you're seeing a skyscraper, even though it's only about 20-some floors high. Anyway, the building was a fiscal failure, disaster. They finally sold it in 1944 to Joseph Kennedy for $13 million. Kennedy held it till 1998. The Kennedy family, he died. They sold it for nearly $1 billion. They still own this piece of land here on your right. It's called Wolf's Point. And as we go along, let's turn the page to number 9. You see a picture of Wolf's Point in 1832. Here's Wolf's Point, 2019. Nothing like it. A lot of the Indian tribes lived here, and it was a kind of place of settlement besides another place we'll see, Fort Dearborn, a little later on in the tour. The Kennedys are building 3 big buildings here.